Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Adriana DeFazio. I'll be your host for this evening. On the anniversary of September 11th, we have the privilege of hosting a BIPOC panel titled The Importance of Community, featuring Arthi Tajuja, Joy Gutierrez, Martina Bowie, Dr. Claudel Glasgow, and Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls. This panel of meditation teachers focuses on issues facing Buddhists, BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and other communities. How does community, meditation, and connection help us face and change harmful circumstance? How do we connect in the age of incredible speed and AI technology? How do we build communities focused on healing, celebration, and wellness? For this evening, Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls will be our facilitator, moderator for the panel. We'll start off with some meditation, and then we'll dive into the panel itself, and then we'll conclude with a Q&A discussion. For those of you who are watching the recorded version, this is accessible via your archive, via the content on weeklydharmagathering.com. For those of you who are joining us live, this video will be posted for your unlimited access within 48 hours after this live talk. Without further ado, because we have so many panelists tonight, I'm going to save us some time and not read everyone's bio out loud, but I will post it in the chat box to the side. And then for those of you who are watching the recording, all of our speaker bios are listed in the description of this talk, of this weekly Dharma gathering. Without further ado, I'll hand off the rest of the evening to Shante.
Thank you, Adriana. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, you can hear me? Good. Okay, great.
I think Shante.
No, I think everyone else can hear me, right? Thumbs up, great. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Right now we have a full house of panelists we're really excited about. I thought we could just start with a little contemplation, a little meditation, and then a little tiny contemplation to just bring to mind as we're having this panel. So if you can take your comfortable seat and just relax in your body, feeling the weight of the day if your day is ending, or maybe it's beginning, depending on when you're watching this. Just feeling your body. Letting your body and your mind greet each other like old friends. Letting your breath be the connection between your body and mind, just your regular breath, and feeling that breath in your body wherever you feel it. Resting your eyes wherever they feel comfortable. For some of you, that may be in front of you on the floor. For some of you, that may be straight ahead. For others, that may be closing your eyes. But resting the eyes not to escape or to recede, but to just feel more deeply. Relaxing any places where there's tension in your body. So checking in, seeing if there's any tension in your jaw or neck, back, hips, shoulders. And allowing this very human and very ancient practice of sitting meditation to bring you in closer contact with your own experience, your own humanity. And the contemplation I'd like us to consider is, where do I find community? First, just saying the phrase in your head and thinking about the meaning of the words. Where do I find community? And then just letting the feeling of those words sink into you. Not necessarily even to come up with an answer, but to pose a question that maybe leads to other questions or leads to feeling. Where do I find community? So, welcome again. And I'd like to just start this or begin the dialogue portion of this panel by asking our four, let me just the gallery view so I can see more, asking our four speakers, and since they don't know what order they're in, I'll just call them out to say their name, pronouns, where they're living, and where they're finding community right now. So maybe we can start with Martina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martina Bowie, and my pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I just recently located out to the West Coast, so I am currently living out in the Oakland area, and I'm really excited to be on the new adventure. Where am I finding community right now? Like that's been a big contemplation for me, especially because I just recently moved a month ago to the West Coast, and so it's making me realize again like how important community is when you like disconnect from or lose it in some form or fashion. For me, it was mainly through a move that I kind of switched to physical locations. Um, and so I've started to, as I'm planting roots in my new space here, been on the search for community. And so I'm very fortunate to have friends, and through technology, being able to use that to connect to community. But it's also important to be, for me, to be in community in the place and space where I live. And so I'm beginning that, like I said, I'm beginning that journey to do that, and realizing how, for me, how much community, how much you have to be intentional about it. I think for me in the past, I have just fallen into groups or falling into friendships or falling into, like, oh, this is a great place to be and hang out. This is a great, class or something. And now I'm starting to realize that I need to be more selective and intentional about, like, the communities that I choose to be a part of. And so I'm kind of starting that phase in my life where I'm being very selective. And so it's been an interesting journey for me. So that's all I'll say for right now, and I'll say more later.
Thank you, Martina. Arthi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arthi Tajuja. My pronouns are she and her. I live in Berwyn, which is very, very close to Chicago, like practically on the border. And I've been here for about 2.5 years in Berwyn, and for 20 in Chicago, and I grew up in Northwest Indiana. So this is kind of my home base, this area. And when I think of community, I feel like I'm part of so many different communities, like a lot of different communities. But the one that really just kind of is drawing me right now is the one I grew up in. So I grew up with a group of Indians. My background is, my parents are from India, and I grew up with 13 Indian families in Northwest Indiana who basically were from all over India, had moved and found each other through random ways because there weren't a lot of us, and formed community around that. And I think I've actually been in this area for so long because something about that, it's like, I feel like I have a gigantic family community here. And while they're not relatives, I've known some of them for, all 41 years of my life. So they are like family to me. So right now I'm really feeling that community. I've been really connected with a lot of people from that community that I grew up in. I just had lunch with my friend Sarita today. And it's just been really heartwarming. And there's just a sense of almost like familiarity and just trust, and just a feeling of warmth is what I get when I think of my community. And I'm also part of so many other communities. So not to take away from them, I'm part of Haji Healing Salon community, which is a healing meditation POC community, predominantly POC community on the South Side. Part of just a lot of different smaller communities in my area, local communities. But just what came to mind in that contemplation was this sort of like home community of mine that's so strong and feels so nourishing right now. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Arthi. Joy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joy Gutierrez, and I am living in New York City, uptown Manhattan. And my pronouns are they, them, most of the time. Yeah, community, such a loaded word these days. Yeah, I'm kind of a visual person. So when we started thinking about this topic, I drew like a bubble diagram. So, and yeah, just a lot of, sort of overlapping things, like, what Arthi mentioned and Martina, my neighborhood of Inwood, my community of friends, my Sangha, which is, Shambhala, New York, but that has dissolved and is sort of, spread out. My family is in the West Coast, and but I can go to a Filipino food place here and just feel right at home and right at like I have this community I didn't know of. And then there's the queer community, like I've been guiding some meditation there. And it's really been wonderful to find all the different people that come through, and just the way that people share and are very open. And yeah, and I think, even this group of panelists here and Adriana, I've been studying a little bit about like inner mandala and outer mandala, and I feel like in some way, like even though I don't have very much contact with all of you, I feel like that there is, this sort of thread of support or just an affinity, and that helps me feel supported. And yeah, and even, like little texting groups. There were a group of people that I met at a Love and Racial Justice retreat this past summer, and we just started texting each other, and that has felt so supportive. And it's uncanny, like how messages come through just when you needed to get that message. So yeah, I'll start with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. G?
Hello. So I am Dr. Claudel Glasgow. Everyone seems to call me Dr. G. Pronouns are doc, she, they, always creating, always evolving. So all respectfully. It seems like a time of transition. So like Martina, I just moved here to Seattle, Washington. Been here for about the same amount of time, for about a month. So something cosmically is moving people along. So with that, I think I've lost track of how many times I've moved in my life. And so it's definitely over 20. And I feel blessed from like East Coast, where I'm from, to West Coast. I have cultivated community. So I feel like lately my definition of community has been shifting. It feels like I'm spending a lot of time cultivating community with my ancestors, because many people have been passing in my family, and just recently, even one just Monday. And so I need them. They're definitely part of my root identity. And maintaining communication with them is very important. So I find myself in community there. After moving to it sounds funny, but water and nature has been my community as well. I find that realizing how interconnected I am particularly with water, which I've been craving a lot of. There's something about that, like I'm a Caribbean American, so I mean, island culture and being around water and being surrounded by water, even living in Staten Island, like all of that, there's something very homey and nurturing about that. And so finding community with that. And I've literally feel like I'm a little bit of a nomad in roaming the city of Seattle, and been finding community in people with shared view. And so I feel like I'm just putting it out there who I would like to connect with, and somehow even on like a 3-hour walk, I bump into somebody, and there's a beautiful connection in that moment. And sometimes it lasts and sometimes it doesn't. but I think my definitions of community have become more transient as and expansive, or I'm playing with that as the tethers that I can depend on have been shifting and changing across my life, especially the last 5 or 6 years. And so technology and like being connected with especially the panelists, many of whom I've known for quite some time, just feels like that's like my inner community. And yeah, I agree with you, Joy. It's like that you get a text message and there's something, I know these people know my mind and heart in some ways. And so there's just an innate feeling of connection when those things come through, even if it's like a GIF or something. So that's where community is right now. So curious where that'll go. Thank you.
Thank you all. So many things, so many themes came up, have arisen. And I feel, even just hearing your perspective, I feel a sense of kind of warmth and like settling and calm. It's really, really quite lovely. So this is open to anyone who wants to answer it. I wonder if you could say, so this sort of subtitle of this panel is about the BIPOC, even though that's not the totality of it. And I wonder if any of you could speak to the importance of being with, Arthur, you mentioned this a little bit in terms of national racial heritage, but being with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, South Asian, Filipino, Caribbean American, being with communities that are part of your racial lineage in terms of meditation, if that's important, or other contemplative or healing practices. Is that important to you, or is any thoughts about that?
I guess I could start. So I like I said, I feel very, this is just me right now. I just feel very, very connected right now to my sort of root community. And I think it has to do for me with some sort of familiarity, where like there's these norms and behaviors that kind of go on in the South Asian community when you grow up being Indian, that are just kind of there and unspoken. And then when we're with each other, that just gets normalized somehow. It's just normal. Whereas some of those norms might be weird in other spaces I've been in, and I have to like talk, either, clarify them, or it's awkward. So there is just something kind of that feels like home. Being with people that have similar kind of, they grow up with similar norms and values. So I think that's important to me to kind of keep. And then I'm also part of another POC community, and there is definitely something about being part of like Haji Healing Salon particularly, and forming kind of POC community on the south side of Chicago. There is something like sort of special about it. A feeling of just, again, familiarity and warmth. And while my Indian community, we grew up practicing in Hinduism, and not very much meditation, although some, there is still a sort of a spiritual connection that I think retains itself from just growing up in that. And my parents still belong to temple. So there's always been a sense of spirituality around that community for me. And then taking that into Haji and taking it into other POC communities, and kind of widening that scope of just only Indians and then all POC. There's something sort of special about that, I'm teaching a meditation group there particularly. And it feels good to kind of bring some of the practices and form communities around the practice with people that maybe have not tapped into that before, because you don't see communities like that in those areas of Chicago, to be honest. And so there's something about that.
Thank you. Yeah, Martina, please.
Uh, um, yeah, and to build and add on to what Arthi was saying, you know, I think also, oh, and I feel this even more intently now living in Oakland, because the city I was living in before I moved here was predominantly a white city. And so now I'm in a city that's a lot more racially balanced. It has a lot more people of color in it. And it, like, I can even just feel the way I move through the city and how I engage with people. I feel it more at home in myself. And I think that's like that also expands to my spiritual communities and to meditation, is that there's a part of myself that can relax when I don't have to always be adhering to someone else's culture all the time. And I can really kind of relax into a space that welcomes all of me, as opposed to only the parts of me that have maybe assimilated or maybe doesn't want to assimilate, or pretending or whatever it is in that moment. And I also, another thing I really love about BIPOC communities in meditation is that the openness and willingness to include other or bring in different traditions. And so it's, you know, so whether the meditation community is founded on, the one I'm a part of is founded on Tibetan Buddhism, but I find that when I'm in BIPOC communities, there's a more willingness to look at, you know, African traditions or other individuals' traditions and kind of marry them together. And I find, like, for me, for healing and for my own strength, that is where my heart kind of really sings, is the bringing up of like all the parts of me, as opposed to segmenting them out and saying, in my meditation, which for me is my spiritual practice, I can only be this way and I can only do this particular culture. It's like, no, I want to actually integrate more. And I find that in BIPOC communities, there's like, that's not a problem. Like it's not like, oh, you have to just do this form, something this way or that way. It's like, oh, okay, right. Let's, you know, let's bring in prayer, you know, into it. We can even welcome Jesus and, you know, into it. We can welcome, you know, the ancestors and do a lot of work around ancestors. And so I find that the practices, the integrated practices are just much more, for me, healing and nourishing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just to build on that as well. Yeah, I feel like being in or practicing in a BIPOC group, it's like I don't even have to explain myself. You know, I can just be, and I think there's something kind of potent and special about a space where you're not dealing with the dominant culture. You can just, you know, just settle into your body. And I don't think you have to justify anything. I mean, you know, if you think about, you know, the truth of suffering and, you know, wanting to practice and I think there's something, I don't know, communal or unsaid, you know, sitting with BIPOC folks. And so in the New York Center, we tried to do a racism, racial inequality group, and it was predominantly, you know, white people that were showing up. And so we kind of figured out, like, BIPOC want a space just to be together and sit. And so, you know, we started doing that this past year, and Shante was there also with Naoko. And that, I feel like, is the most helpful, especially in these times.
Doc, do you want to add anything, or?
I think all's been said, but I think the piece for me that sticks is, meditation for me has been like a non-dualistic space, and a space where I don't have to reject anything. And I think that when I'm with other people of color, there's a sense of being seen as an individual. And also, like, no part of me is really rejected when I'm with other people of color. There's like a being seen, that and then a combination of that, of my being, that doesn't happen in majority spaces. So, and also being seen at my intersections, right? So there's this way with which, when I'm in majority spaces practicing, where it does become very dualistic. I'm like, who's the G who's presenting now? Like, who am I around? And I think someone spoke to like relaxation. I think that that's what happens when I feel like I'm in these communities, is that can relax, that those compartmentalizations and those demarcations can just relax. So that's all I had to add to that.
Thank you. There's been a growing sense of, or growing visible in Western Buddhism, non-Asian Western Buddhism, talking about structures of oppression. And in the last decade or so, there's been an explosion of books and retreats and groups that are getting together around affinity groups, whether that's queer and trans, men's groups, women's groups, young people's groups, and particularly BIPOC groups. I read a statistic, there's a Black Wisdom Summit online that starts tomorrow that G and I are part of, as well as other famous people, Reverend Angel and Ruth King and Lama Rod and all these people. And there was, I was reading something that said that 3% of Buddhists in the United States are Black, which I definitely believe. And I've been thinking about this explosion of BIPOC spaces. Insight was the first Buddhist organization in the West to start that kind of group. And I wonder, and there's been a lot of pushback, or a lot of people feel uncomfortable. A lot of straight people feel like, well, where's our space? And a lot of white people, and I wonder if you could speak to the kind of efficacy. I mean, you've said it, but do you see those spaces as divisive or as dualistic, or do you see them as something else? Martina, please.
Well, I always think this question is always interesting about it being, like a divisive space, because it's like, if you say, oh, there's a women's group, people kind of in generally get that. Like, no, there's no pushback. They're like, well, that's fine. Men usually aren't, or maybe they were back in the 70s, but, over the decades, they've learned not to storm in, And so there's some, and so we do this kind of, we say there's a mother's group, or we say there's a father's group. Like, so we have these groups and these like ways of people who need to get together, have conversations, who want to heal. Like, we already do this. And so then, but for some reason, it's just like, when you start to talk about it around race, sometimes even sexuality, then people freak out about it. And I just find that interesting, because it's not something that we are unfamiliar with in our culture, around groups of people needing to, needing or wanting or yearning to get together for a particular reason. And so, within the Buddhist community, you can feel the pushback, and then especially around the like, well, in the absolute, aren't we just all the same, kind of rhetoric around that. But there's like a refusal to acknowledge that the relative here now, there are differences, and that people are treated differently. People do have different experiences, and that people need to heal in different combinations and in different ways, and to allow that to happen, to be open for that, as opposed to shutting that process down. So I just kind of feel like, again, that like, we already do this in society in so many different levels of allowing this to happen, and recognizing that this is also a process for for us, for different people, different races, BIPOC, to do the work that we need to do, and also allow white people to do the work that they need to do, and then coming together at some point, if that seems to be the right thing to do. But that there's process in that. So.
Thank you. Hey, Dr. G.
I've noticed that. I feel like BIPOC gathering I feel like it's both a threat, and I also feel like it begins to like call to question, or perhaps the majority culture make them fear us really naming what's been the foundation of a lot of oppression, also which a lot of people maintain their power and build systems. And so this idea that I think that, you know, for a number of years, there's been ways with which we've kind of been kept separate in one way or another, or limited in the amount of how many of us can gather, quote unquote. And I feel a lot of it is connected with some degree of fear. Like, what happens if we all get together? What are we gonna do? And there's a lot of blocking against that. I've been in queer spaces and haven't been like interrupted as much as when I'm speaking with a couple of other, you know, people of color about anything. I one person I particularly have heard said that they're like afraid that we're gonna get angry at them if we gather, and to think that we're centering them during that time and space is I think quite interesting. So, I mean, I really feel like, just like everyone else, like we need spaces with which we and our whole being can be seen in order to heal and move past things. And I think that that's been hard for people to really like accept and be open to. And I think a lot of it's due to fear. You know, I think a lot of times when I'm in BIPOC spaces, we're talking about some pretty deep stuff. We just like get to it. Like, I feel like we can just get to the pain of whatever the situation is. And I don't know everybody. I don't know if a lot of majority people are like able to do that. And I think that that's probably why I stick to more BIPOC spaces for that reason, because there's so much avoidance of that degree of touching into suffering. But that's the only way that we can even begin to heal. And so, like, for me, I can only speak to myself personally, like, that's why it's so important, because there's no other way to shift things, as everyone, no matter what their demographic says they want something to shift. There's no way that we can really do that unless we're willing to be brave and touch the prickliness of that fear. And I feel like many of my BIPOC family has done that, because we've had no choice to in our everyday life. And like, can we just talk about that? And we don't have the luxury of being like able to compartmentalize that in our lives. So there's something about that feels like, I think for some people, hard to enter and hard to fathom, like, who the heck would want to do that? And and there's some kind of like disruption that happens at that intersection. So
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Arthi.
So I think people should realize that this is just maybe where we're at right now in the world. Like, I mean, especially in this country, in the United States, like this is where we're at. I don't think that groups have to be there forever, but we're in this, we need healing right now. Like, we need these healing spaces. So, so it just reminds me of a year or two ago, I was in a training. It was a diversity training, and it was a mixed group. You know, it was mostly white, a few people of color sprinkled in there. And what was really interesting for me, I went because I was just really curious as to how a mixed group would be handled. And what kind of sticks out for me is that there was a comment made by a white person, and then, but it was a comment that was infuriating for the people of color in the room. And so you could just collectively feel, there was maybe 5 or 6 people of color, you could collectively feel kind of the wrath, of all of us. And she could feel it too, this woman who had said this thing. And then all of a sudden there was this thing where like she clearly needed to try to understand that, and that is definitely where she was. But in that space, she didn't feel like she could because there was a lot of anger. And so then what I saw was that then you had white people sort of shut down, and then you had people of color who were angry, and then it just became a space where nothing could actually, no healing could actually occur, because who's going to heal in that kind of a space, right? For me, there was no point in being in that space. It was a training for white people, it felt like, it was not a training for me. So it felt like a little bit of a waste of my time, and I didn't really need to be in a space where I just felt angry. So I think it's sort of beneficial for both white people and people of color. It's not just people of color need their spaces, but I actually think white people also need their own spaces. And like in that context, if we weren't in the room, I recognize that if we weren't in the room, she actually might have had the opportunity, and her white friends that were in the room might have had an opportunity. They might have been able to kind of work through that, without us needing to be there, like whatever it was that they needed to work out. Because there were white people in the space that also caught this, right? But they could have worked with that. So I just think it's just about, it's really, these spaces are about healing. And I think that's like a concept that people don't seem to understand. And I'm finding that the more and more I explain it that way, that it's really about healing. It isn't about, like we're trying to separate and it's divisive in some way or whatnot, but it's more of, it's healing spaces. That's what we're creating. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on that.
Joy, do you have?
Yeah, juicy question. Yeah, in hearing all of you speak, it just, it made me think continually of, when Toni Morrison was having an interview, and it was some white gentleman, and she said, like, what I really want to know is, who are you without us? Like, because I don't think you know. And sometimes I feel like that, you could say that it's fear-based, ignorance, spiritual bypassing, we are one, absolute truths, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it is sort of a reaction. It is, born out of fear, and not understanding why we need to do it. And like Arthi says, it is for healing. It is for being understood without having to explain as much. And even when we are in, BIPOC circles, there's even, a further sort of like, oh, can we even caucus a little bit further to get a more fine-grained conversation, so you can have queer, you can have trans, you can have, and so that intersectionality comes in as well. But I've just, yeah, it still sort of surprises me. I don't know why, but I think, white people have to sort of do a little work as well and come to terms with, the kind of practices that we're trying to do as well.
Thank you. You all are making me think of, I think, which will be my last question, but I do want to say, I think this emphasis on healing, this emphasis on healing our own internal oppression, healing from being minoritized in the United States, and also really being able to have clear seeing, of course, which is a Buddhist principle, about the dynamics that when we walk through the doors of these sanghas, we're not dropping the things that we were doing right before we came in, the ways that we are recognized or not recognized in the world. We bring that into our communities of practitioners, and any community of practitioners that it doesn't have group self-reflection is just as doomed as any person who doesn't have individual self-reflection. And in that vein, I'm wondering, I have this sort of question about futurity, which is to say, well, maybe you're already a part of the kinds of groups you like to be part of, but when you imagine a sangha specifically, and I know we all are part of many different communities that include family and friends and work and pleasure and all that, but when you imagine a meditation community, a Buddhist community, we're all Buddhists, what would you imagine? What would be ideal? What would be like the community that you would want to be a part of? I'll start. I really see myself, it's interesting because the technology aspect of the moment is really important. Being able to practice with friends across time and space via technology. And some of us on this call have had a chat group, a text group for 3 years now. And at the same time, for me, there's just nothing like being in person, the flesh and blood quality of meditating and breathing and listening to people fart or whatever in a room. There's something about that's really important, going on retreat. So those two things together are really valuable for me. And also, I've been really drawn to Black spaces in particular. In the spaces where trying to work out, combat, patriarchy and trans and queer antagonism. And my dog is like, got a toy and like making all this noise in the background, but and classism and ethnic squabbles and national kind of squabbles. And that's felt really important to bring the Dharma for me into be with other Black practitioners and teachers. And then, BIPOC, queer and trans and so forth. Because I feel a sense of urgency around that actually, and a sense of why is it that people haven't been able to access the Dharma? What are the blocks to that? So that's really become my focus. Also working, bringing, I used to do work with bringing Dharma into incarcerated spaces where incarcerated people are, and that's coming back with that. So incarceration, people who are facing incarceration and people who are in recovery, there are a lot of spaces where the Dharma isn't penetrating. And it's really, for me, from my experience as someone who's been meditating for a bit, it gets stuck in these spaces whose doors are closed. So. Dr. G.
I think just to add to the mention on doors being closed, for me, the really placing the emphasis back on our individual care for one another and being with one another as opposed to focusing on the maintenance of like a structure or a space. I think we're in a time where things can be more spacious in how we gather and where we gather. And so I think when we're able to have more time with one another, whether that be through food, for me, like food and like music, like I miss hearing like sounds and like chanting more, and intergenerational, like having access across ages and just us being together and focusing on each other and each other's gifts and how those gifts can be of service and wisdom to the space. That for me is just like the ground of like the building of any good community. But for me, like then the practice and sharing the view and and practicing out of a space of caring for one another as individuals and as families is flourishes naturally. We take care of each other naturally. And so I'm really wanting to like broaden out of the shift from like more materialistic structure and like organizational like sustaining to like individual sustaining and expansion and connection.
Arti.
As soon as you asked that question, I started dreaming. What could this place look like? I don't know, because I just started dreaming because you just asked this question. I just piggybacking off of what Claudel said, I see lots of fun and food and music. And when Claudel and I used to live in the same city and we belonged to the Shambhala Center in Chicago, we used to constantly be singing in the halls of the center. And there was a kind of silliness we brought, and some people just thought we were crazy, and others would chime in. And so more of that, and creativity, and not being so boxed in, like this is what Dharma looks like, and this is only what we have to do. But that those boxes are not there, and when someone comes in with a new idea, instead of rejecting it right away because it sounds like it doesn't belong here, but we're instead like, wow, that's interesting, tell me more, you know, this sort of like curiosity about what people really are needing and wanting. And then just in terms of access, like I love that, like, you know, who doesn't have access to the Dharma and who does and why? And looking at that and creating different access points in. And I think too that if it's not a like cookie cutter Dharma, then we will create access points quite naturally, because so many people will be able to just come up with ideas and we will be down with that. You know, we'll be excited about that as opposed to putting a block on it. And then I would like to see other practices that are not just individual-based practices like meditation, but practices that are communal, because I think it's just like, it's never going to be perfect, and we're always going to have conflict. And so I would like to see how we could incorporate practices that actually work with conflict, like community circles, and also there's all sorts of different things we could do. And more body-centered practices, because I don't feel like we use the body very much in Dharma communities, and I think that's a big problem. And then this idea of creating groups, you know, these groups that we've been talking about here, having lots of those, like lots of, whoever wants to create a group on anything, you know, like, let's do it, you know, let's have groups. And just a sense of playfulness, and care, like Claudel said, like this natural sense of care, and where food is not a big deal. In my last Dharma community, it always felt like food was a big deal. And in my sort of Indian world, like we had the, you know, moms and grandmothers and everybody's cooking in the kitchen, and like, you know, there's just pots of food coming out everywhere every single Sunday, every time we're together, like there's never not food. More of that. It's just in the culture as opposed to a thing we have to do or a burden, which sometimes kind of has felt like that for me typically. And then the last thing I'll say is I think we have to get away from a capitalist Dharma. You know, it's a very we're in a capitalist culture, and I feel like the Dharma, because it's part of that culture, has fallen into that somehow. And so I'd like to see us thinking about what do we do to kind of get out of that, or veer away from that as much as we can, or rethink that, I should say. Just think out of the box about that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm excited for this, whatever this is.
Yeah. So we're about at 8. So I was wondering maybe if there were any questions from our participants. about for the panelists, or about anything that was said, or anything you'd like to add? Adriana, do you want to remind how to do questions?
Yeah, if anyone has a question, they can just unmute themselves very easily, and then I'll spotlight your video if you'd like. If you'd like not to be seen, that's okay too, and you can make sure your video is off. But I can start. I have a question. I guess two things. The first is less a question and more a statement, but I find that what I miss most in meditation and Dharma communities is like the intangible, like it sounds silly, but like staffing a program and like everyone really on their best behavior, or like trying to really embody basic goodness. Yeah, like, or like going to like a Tuesday night Dharma gathering and everyone's just like so friendly. I don't know. I don't, yeah, like everyone cleaning the kitchen in ways that they probably never clean their kitchen at home. Like, you know, like, yeah, like uplifted cheese platters. I don't, like things like that, like the intangible that makes community, that's really just like something you feel based off of behaviors being exemplified around you. Yeah, because I feel like I'm a part of a lot of communities, and like a lot of them happen to be online. I have Ethan Nichtern's online Buddhist studies course on Tuesday nights. Joy is part of the faculty. Then we have these on Wednesday nights. But I spend most of my day looking at a computer already in some capacity during work. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, the intangible I miss a lot. And then speaking, Arti, you mentioning like capitalist Dharma or like meditation, it makes me think, I did in New York, there something called a Wandering Sangha for a little bit. I still exist. And I was on the email listserv, and essentially it was like people met up in different people's homes for practice. Yeah. And it almost like, I ended up signing off the email list for a few reasons, but one of them primarily was that like I almost felt like being I forgot who mentioned this. I think it was Martina, like how community has to be really intentional. But it like almost felt like work. Like it was like, oh, like I felt guilty if I missed a gathering, or like if I didn't volunteer to host. And like, I felt capitalist in this way that it felt like something on my to-do list rather than something that like was genuine in community. And I think there's something about like, of course, having a center or like a physical place where it's like, I can show up for a Tuesday night Dharma gathering like once every 3 months. No one really cares. And it's totally cool. Yeah, so not like I think I'm just thinking of like capitalism beyond just like monetary exchange, but like capitalism and like energy, like not to say that like the energy always has to be easy for it to feel not capitalistic, but yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts. None of these were questions. These were just all comments. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop talking now.
There any other questions from other folks? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for showing up tonight, the panelists, our hosts, our participants. And this is really giving me a lot of food for thought. I'm looking forward to rewatching it or to watching it instead of participating. And I wonder if, Adriana, if you could just remind us who's, I think Vic is presenting next week.
Yeah, so we'd love for whoever's watching to join us next week. We have a great talk by Vic Vega. It's titled Off the Cushion. The week following, we have Justin Miles joining us for a talk titled, one second, I think it's Realizing Enlightened Black Society. Yes, that's it, on September 25th. And then I'm actually teaching on the 2nd of October. So please join for that as well in 3 weeks. But otherwise, please join us next week for Vic and the week afterwards for Justin. Thank you to all our panelists, to Shantae for moderating. It's really awesome to see all your faces in a row all together.
And please follow us on Facebook, Weekly Dharma Gathering, and on Instagram at Weekly Dharma. We'd love to have you, and we're now doing memes. So thank you all so much, and thank you again to Arthi, Joy, Martina, and Claudel for joining us for this panel. Thank you.